Hi again. Welcome to our daily Advent devotional for Tuesday, December 8th. So glad to have you join me again. And again, we go back to our Advent calendar, and today, pull out our Bible verse, keeping the chocolate for later. And our Bible verse is from the book of James, chapter 1, verse 22, in which we are told, "But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves." I think we're going to see that that's pretty important. Well, today, as we look at this verse and this concept in this season of Advent, I want to share. Last week we had talked about nativity scenes, and I find it fascinating. I totally forgot that even in the top of my Advent calendar here, I have a little nativity scene. I'm going to have to remember to take a photograph of that and include it in our Crush Festival. So, for those of you who are not aware, on our church's website, that would be westsideumc.info, we have a special page for Advent and Christmas 2020. And part of that is a virtual Crush Festival. I shared last week about a church in the Harrisburg area that had done this. And so when we started it last week, there were just 6 or 7 photos of nativity scenes that I personally own, sort of a side effect of being a pastor, I guess. But I just want to say how excited I am to see all of these other photos that people have submitted. Tammy's been receiving them and putting them up. I don't even remember how many nativity scenes we're up to, but it's such a great way of being able to celebrate the holidays. And then we remembered to get a photo up of the large nativity scene that is outside the front of the church. Of course, the one that is by the altar in the front of the sanctuary. I think we actually have a couple more that we need to photograph from the church and share with you online as well. So if you haven't already done that, please feel free to take a photo of a favorite nativity scene, one that you own, maybe one that you've seen elsewhere, and send it in to Tammy, WSUNC, at WSUMC at atlanticbbn.net. And we'd be so happy to get that up and share it with everybody. Well, as I had shared a little bit last week, the form of a nativity set was actually the brainchild of St. Francis of Assisi. And I'm stealing some more details out of this book, 101 Amazing Things About Christmas. And what's interesting is that St. Francis decided in 1223, imagine that, 1223 was the year, that he wanted to recreate the night Jesus was born. And so in a small town between Rome and Assisi, he and his friend Giovanni Vellida, what a great name, built a stable, and they dressed some people as Mary and Joseph and shepherds. He used a wax doll to represent Jesus, and he included animals such as a donkey and some cows and some sheep, all of which were real, because he wanted the manger scene. He wanted to show people what the manger scene would have been like, to help people remember God's gift of his own son, Jesus Christ. About 1,500 residents from a nearby town came to view the spectacle of this display. Francis read from the scriptures, and the tradition carries on in small and large ways ever since. Maybe you've had the opportunity to go to a live nativity, and it's a great way of realizing that this was not all, what's the word? Wine and roses is the phrase that sometimes comes to mind. When Jesus gave up the glories of heaven, it wasn't for an easy road here on earth. He lived a very humble life. In fact, so humble that they didn't even have a place to live and stay when he was born. He was born and placed in an animal's feeding trough, a manger, as a little baby. And so he can really identify with all of us, no matter how scarce our resources, nor how glorious. And so praise be to God that he indeed came. Well, We don't know much about Ebenezer Scrooge's childhood other than the scene when he's with the spirit of Christmas past and he is found alone over the Christmas holidays at his boarding school. In one scene, we see that he's there by himself. All the other children have gone to their own homes, and he is told that it's said that he has nowhere to go for Christmas. In a slightly later scene, his younger sister comes with the great news that their father has changed quite a bit and he is indeed welcome home. So Ebenezer Scrooge didn't apparently have much of a good childhood. It was pretty rough, pretty estranged from his own family, and he was often solitary and alone, especially over the holiday season. And so, what is amazing is the transformation that we begin to see in Ebenezer Scrooge, even with the very first visit of the spirit of Christmas past. And again, today we are taking our lesson from 52 Little Lessons from a Christmas Carol by Bob Welch. And today we're on lesson 18. Again, we're just sort of jumping around. But what's interesting is that neither the Ghost of Christmas Past or the Spirit of Christmas Past or the other two that come along, they don't do anything in the way of lecturing. In fact, the Spirit of Christmas Future doesn't say a single word at all. What they understand is that seeing or showing something has a far greater impact than just sharing words. And so there aren't any tellings here. There aren't any lectures. You should do better. You should live better. Instead, they demonstrate and show to Ebenezer the ways in which his life thus far has failed to produce the results he truly wanted and truly could be proud of. And instead, how he has become a miserable old Scrooge, as the vernacular goes today. Well, Dickens himself was a good example of the importance of showing rather than telling, not just in the way that he wrote in describing how things happened, but in his own life. And again, Charles Dickens was a faithful follower of Christ, and even when he was a famous author, which was relatively young, he was indeed even in his late 20s, had gotten notoriety as being a good author. But he was also a self conscious and responsible citizen who never forgot that fame gave him an unusual opportunity to comment on and influence political events. He was often a benefactor at fundraisers that would help the poor and the needy. And so we see just how much he valued that in his own life. And again, we see that in the story of A Christmas Carol and the transformation that we eventually see in Ebenezer Scrooge. You know, the same is true of our own lives and our own interactions with people in our lives. How many times have we found that lecturing someone did not get the results that maybe we wanted? And that's true whether it's a parent to a child or a boss to an employee or any number of relationships. A lot of times telling people what they should and shouldn't do doesn't really succeed in accomplishing our task, but instead demonstrating kindness or showing how we want something done can be far more effective. Oh, Miss Kitty, I wish I could do the same thing with you. Lectures don't work, do they? No, they don't. Well, indeed, we see this in our daily lives as Christians. St. Francis of Assisi, the same one who gave us the manger, was famous for the line, "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." And it wasn't that he didn't think that we needed to say the words that would explain to others who God is, the great love that God has for us, the sin in our own lives, and our need for God, which can only be satisfied through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But rather, he knew that lecturing wouldn't get us very far. And instead, we needed to demonstrate God's love in our own lives, in the ways that we have been transformed. You know, it's really simple for us to quote scripture, if you are a person who's memorized a lot of scripture, or sing hymns, or listen to Christian radio. We can slap a fish symbol on the back of our car, or put a nativity scene out in front of our house. But that doesn't always go the whole way in sharing with others who Christ is and why that's so important. And so it's valuable for us to demonstrate and not just lecture, but it's also means that we have to use enough words to explain the difference. When Scrooge is facing his past with the spirit of Christmas past, he's taken to the party of his old boss, Fezziwig, and in that time he finds great joy. But it also reminds him of the fact that even though he enjoyed all of these festivities and people in the past, it demonstrates just how much he's missed out on that in his present, and how solitary and cold his life has become. And he is faced with the conviction of just how much he has changed, not for the better, but for the worse. And that, ooh, little heart pain there, doesn't it? It gives Scrooge perspective that he's been afraid to revisit over the years about what might have been contrasted against what actually was. Ooh, heart pain number 2. And it reconnects him with feelings he hasn't experienced for a long, long time. Even in thinking about that one party, he remembers the pleasure of enjoying himself, something that a man who eats gruel alone on Christmas Eve is no longer accustomed to doing. 3 strikes, right? Right to the heart. It finally, in demonstrating and showing to Scrooge what he's missed out on in the ways that his life has changed, not for the better, his heart is hurt, and he finally cries out to the Spirit, "Leave me, take me back, haunt me no more." Dickens, in his introduction to A Christmas Carol, invites us to think about our own lives. And he says this: "May this story haunt your house pleasantly." I hope that these stories do indeed haunt us pleasantly, both the scripture and the story of A Christmas Carol, so that we can learn the value of living Christmas well, not just in this season, but all year long. See you tomorrow.